Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be discussing Dark Athena coming to North America and Europe this Monday, including her team building, discussion, as well as the rationale behind spending 750,000 monster points. So, before I go any further, I want to strongly stress that you should not nuke your monster box for 750,000 monster points to buy Dark Athena. This is because that is a terrible idea for the most part, as well as the fact that she will be a permanent addition to the Monster Point shop. So, now that that is out of the way, we can now kind of go exploring what makes Dark Athena so great. So, Dark Athena was released in Japan quite some time ago, and there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether North America and Europe would receive her as a card they could purchase from the MP shop. Now, she is going to be coming on May 1st, so the question of will change from when Dark Athena to should I buy Dark Athena? And whether or not you should buy Dark Athena is quite a loaded question because this is going to cost you 750,000 monster points, and this is not a decision you should take lightly. You should be actually thinking this through quite thoroughly, as well as doing your own research. Now, my hopes of this article will at least provide you answers to said questions, and I did write about her extensively beforehand, but this new article and posting is a much more updated version. It's been rewritten to include a team building and inheritance section, so this might help answer some of your questions. So, Dark Athena at a glance. She is God Devil Attacker with a modest amount of health, an amazing amount of attack, and horrible recovery. And she has triple TPA, triple skill boost, and full bind immunity. Her active skill enhances all water and dark orbs, as well as a 3-turn delay on an 11-turn cooldown. Her leader skill is 1.5 times health and 3.5 times attack for god, devils, and attackers, along with 2 times attack and 2 times recovery when matching dark and water orbs at the same time. So that means she translates into a 2.25 times health, 49 times attack, and 4 times recovery leader. So that may not necessarily look crazy on paper, but she actually has many different things going well for her. First off, she has some form of damage control. You do have 12.25 or 49 times attack. You have an insane amount of base attack as well as triple TPA. So when we combine all that together, that 49 times attack becomes significantly higher when you're able to match those tasty dark TPAs. She is tanky and durable through the health, like the constant health, and the conditional recovery multiplier. You basically have one of the most powerful teams that can farm endgame content such as Arena 3, and you do have actually relatively flexible team building. Obviously there are ideal or optimal teams out there, but she is quite gentle compared to other leaders that are presently available. Her active skill does combine a delay as well as a damage enhance, so again, twofold actives are powerful and meaningful. She does have the ability to overcome combo shields because there's no wonky heart cross or rose needing to be utilized, and she comes ready to use. As soon as you buy her, she is in this form. All you need to do is level her up, give her Tamadra's, awaken her, and inherit and latent her. So this is quite exciting for the most part because essentially any player will be able to utilize her, unlike the other Monster Point cards, because you have to go through the hurdles of evolutions which are possibly out of reach for the average player. Furthermore, Dark Athena can use Hakus, and Haku is amazingly powerful, which I'll discuss more in a bit. And finally, you actually could even use her as a sub. Would you want to? I don't know, but it's actually a decent sub overall. So, in terms of cons, you have to match both water and dark to trigger the recovery, and that means you're hitting for 49 times, so stalling will actually be quite challenging and problematic. Furthermore, there is no SBR present on her awakening, so double Dark Athena in solo mode will have to use a double SBR sub for 100% coverage, which does place some constraints on your team building practices. She does actually have low natural orb movement time because she has no time extends, and her ideal team also has very little time extends available. And a Gemstone and Princess is somewhat required for massive burst damage because even though it is 49 times attack, even though there is TPA, it's not as potent as some row-based leaders that don't necessarily need the Gemstone. So that can be seen as a con, as well as the fact that it does cost 750,000 monster points. So basically these impressions are kind of somewhat covering the above mentioned points, but one thing I want to note is that yes, 49 times attack may seem small, but the fact that you have triple TPA with massive base attack, as well as the ability to use TPA subs means that your 49 times attack becomes significantly higher. Furthermore, with the release of more 7 combo awakening cards, that means you're actually able to deal double damage with those cards as well as having TPAs. And that's partially why that makes duplicate Hakus so amazingly powerful, because you have 2 TPAs, you have the right typing, you have 7 combo awakenings, you are going to dish out amazing amounts of damage. Furthermore, you are tanky and durable, so again, you can somewhat stall out mechanics. Most notably, you would actually tank hits repeatedly until you get low health, then you match your hearts with the dark and water to heal up to full, as well as sweeping the floor. So stalling is challenging, but it is manageable just because you're going to have probably 70,000 plus health in solo mode, which is a lot. So, Dark Athena compared to other Monster Point cards. So, it's pretty well established that Raw Dragon is an amazing leader, and Yomi Dragon is amazingly potent as well, as both a leader and a sub. And in all honesty, if you cannot afford or you can't build a team for Dark Athena, they should really be the 2 Monster Point cards you actually do pursue and purchase, because they are just simply the best ones available outside of Dark Athena. And they will actually be able to help push you into more endgame content, because that should be the goal with a Monster Point card purchase. You want to push into endgame content. Like, if you are spending, say, 300,000 Monster Points or 750, you want to actually advance your progression. You don't want to be able to farm the same content over and over again with it. It's not helping you progress overall. And that's partially why, say, Ragnarok Dragon, while a powerful sub, may not necessarily help you, because the teams that he is used on are somewhat faltering. They're not as consistent as other teams that are currently available. Odin Dragon may be cool, but he is basically a weaker Aizen and somewhat on par with Light Metatron, so it's not accomplishing that much. Shiva Dragons for great speed farming, especially in solo mode and ranking dungeons, but those are not necessarily the concerns of the average player. Neptune Dragon is just clumsy and awkward to use because he requires far too many water orbs and doesn't actually output that much damage. And finally, the 4 Gentlemen series are just in an awkward place right now. You should really not be pursuing them if you are a newer or average player. So, while these points may sound critical, it is important to realize that Monster Point cards should be what helps you progress overall. Like, if you are only clearing, say, Arena 1, you shouldn't buy a Monster Point card to make Arena 1 easier. You should be buying them to make Arena 3 more doable or within reach. And if you want to check out my Monster Point tier list, you feel free to check this article here. And as always, this entire posting will be linked in the YouTube description down below. So, 750,000 Monster Points. Now, 750,000 Monster Points essentially translates into 2.5 times the price tag of a regular Monster Point card. And you have to almost think, will I be gaining 2.5 times the value compared to the other ones? Now, like I mentioned before, Yomi Dragon and Raw Dragon are the best 2 other options available. And Raw Dragon has a horribly restrictive sub pool as well as inheritance setup. You can obviously deviate from the ideal team, but that's going to nuke his consistency, which is his shining strength. Whereas Yomi Dragon, while it is an 81 times attack, 4 times recovery lead, does have some limitations on her own. Like, she does somewhat need to have co-op to have enough health to tank most endgame content, as well as the fact that she does have some issues with damage control. So, taking all that into consideration, Yomi Dragon and Raw Dragon are great, but they're not for everyone. So, it might be the fact that Dark Athena is the best option for you, because Dark Athena will clear more content than Yomi Dragon with greater ease. So if you have overlapping subs minus the Akachis, you could possibly field a stronger Dark Athena team and start clearing and possibly even farming Arena 3. Conversely, Raw Dragon has subs that you may not necessarily have, so Dark Athena may actually just be the best option for you, provided you actually have the subs to go with it, as well as the points to consider, which I'm about to explain. So, Dark Athena is justifiable for 750,000 Monster Points. In addition, another thing I want to stress is that there's no evolution tree. You can buy her and use her right away. You don't have to go through the hurdles of Arena 3, which you couldn't do beforehand, or even battling those amazingly challenging gorilla dungeons for those evolutions. So there is a lot of validity to buying Dark Athena. So, points that I want you to consider before making a purchase, because this is a very large amount of monster points. Do you actually have 4 dark cards that do not remove water orbs you can actually use as subs? Of those cards, how many are TPA oriented? Do you have a double SBR card for solo mode, which is very important because you won't have 100% coverage otherwise? How many Hakus do you own? May sound strange, but Haku is amazing. Do you have Ideal Inherits, which I'll discuss below? And will Dark Athena advance your progression overall? Most likely she will advance your progression overall, to be fair. Because Puzzle & Dragons has somewhat transitioned into the state that the goal is now really to farm Arena 3. No longer is it to get that first time clear, it's to farm it. So this is a different landscape than it was, say, 6 months ago, mostly because we have so many different leaders available and the fact that we don't really have much endgame content to play otherwise. Arena 1 has been trivialized somewhat through power creep, and Colosseum, while it is challenging, is not as rewarding outside of perhaps your first Orpharian acquired. So really want to farm Arena 3, and that's what Dark Athena does very well, because she can do it very quickly, because you can blow up most floors with only 4 dark and 3 water, so you can mow through stuff fast and efficiently, as well as being able to tanky enough to deal with the radars. In Colosseum, she doesn't do as well, mostly because Colosseum is a much more grindy and stall festival by comparison, so that's where Dark Athena somewhat lacks, because you need to have those other orbs available, but still strong and competent Colosseum clearer. So my goal, at least for most people, my goal as well as your goal should be farming Arena 3. Like, yes, you may be able to clear Arena 1 or for easily, but that really shouldn't be the goal with the 750,000 monster points. So, team building for Dark Athena. So, basically with any team in Puzzle & Dragons, there are obviously going to be more ideal or optimal cards available, and I personally dislike the fact that there are optimal or ideal teams, but sadly, that is the truth of the matter. There will be cards that are just simply better, and you should be somewhat pursuing them. However, what you should be looking for when trying to select subs to use for your Dark Athena are the following points, in order of relevance or preference. So, 1, they need to be Dark Primary Attribute. There are going to be people who are going to be asking, should I be using Ryune or Blue Sonia or other water dark cards like Yumasachi, Yamasachi? Sure, they do work, but it's very far from optimal, and why would you want to handicap yourself right away from the get-go? Like, just use dark cards overall because your leaders are dark primary, and you want to be able to at least put out as much reliable damage as possible. 2 SBRs. Now, if you are playing in solo mode, this is probably maybe the most important aspect over dark primary attribute, but the reason is because if you get your skills locked, you're going to have a bad time because you may not be necessarily able to activate, you may not be able to survive, and it's just a horrible thing overall. For the most part, if you play co-op mode, this is not an issue, but in solo mode, it becomes a pressing concern. And I've actually ranked the double SBR cards available in terms of how potent or powerful they are. Now, Loki is the best one possible, and Asmodeus, I can't say their name properly, is a collab which will be buffed at some point to have better awakenings, so they'd be the second best. Then Durga, Awoken Oku, Castor equals Hamal, Halloween Alirani is 7th, and then your Chester is 8th. So as long as you have at least one of these cards, you should be able to get by, but ideally you want to have the higher ranked ones if at all possible. 2 or more TPAs. Now, it is ideal to run at least 2+ TPA cards because, again, Dark Athena has 3. It helps keep all cards at least around a similar level of damage output because if they don't have TPA, 49 times is actually not that spectacular. They won't be hitting for very much damage, so you will be having someone who's kind of lagging behind, so to speak. Now, you can possibly get away with some more utility cards that bring something beneficial to the team if they don't have TPA. For instance, Yomi, Anubis, and Eshamali are all viable cards, and using them as one of your subs can work out provided you have at least TPA cards to help bring up the team overall. High base stats. Now, with the Age of Reincarnation, we have 1,000 weighted stat monsters, and it's just almost too good to pass up on, because if they have high base stats, they are going to, actually, sorry, I skipped one, but I'll just go out, relevant active skill. Having a relevant active skill is important because it means less stalling, having them ready on turn 1 in solo mode, as well as being readily available faster. If a card has all the above points, as well as a relevant active skill, they will be a desirable sub. And next we come to high base stats. So like I said, high base stats are important because 1,000 weighted stats is amazing, as well as the fact that Athena boosts parameters for all 3. So their health is going to be 2.5 times, their attack is multiplied, the recovery is greatly amplified. So if you can, that's why cards like, say, those reincarnated Anubis and Yomi do have some merit because they have those weighted stats as well as time extends and utility that you may be lacking otherwise. And finally, 7 combo awakenings are actually very important and powerful. Now, we may not have many of those available at this point in time. Maybe as more of them become more accessible, that might move up. It's more so just an extra benefit from, say, Sima Yi, Haku, and Loki. So, putting it all together. Now, like I said, I don't like the idea that ideal teams exist because people get into the mindset that if you don't have the ideal team, you are horrible and trash. That's wrong. It makes it so it's obviously easier, but there are workarounds and alternatives, and it just means this team will have the highest level of consistency. But you obviously can make changes and amends here and there. But for the most part, you obviously have Dark Athena as your leader, but you have basically 3 reincarnated Hakus and a Loki when you're playing in solo mode. Now, that team obviously has the best bases, but we need the inherits to go alongside of it. And in terms of inherits, Zeta Hydra is probably one of the most powerful and popular. You can use non-awoken Orochis because that way they have the 5-turn delay. You do use Reunite because Reunite is basically a direct upgrade of Haku's active skill. Lumiel is to bypass pre-draws. Indra is to tank out, say, Ill 6 or other nasty mechanics. And Facette is your best burst option available. And finally, Fujin is just an amazing card overall. It breaks the absorption from Vishnu, but most notably, it breaks the absorb from Hera Dragon, which makes Hera Dragon trivial at this point in time. So when you do have Fujin, it does lower the reliance on using Indra because Indra is mostly to tank out now at this point Ill 6s in Rage. You can use, say, Genie or any other options, as well as the fact that Hera Dragon is no longer a threat. Indra's validity is a little lower. Facette can obviously be replaced by Carrot. It's a less burst overall, but still meaningful for the most part. You have more than enough skill boost to create enough burst damage. Lumiel is basically a way to deal with pre-draws the most efficiently, but obviously you can have options like Famiel as well as other true damage or poison nukers, which you'll see in the inherits down below. Reunite is the best board changer, but again, you can use other board changers as substitutes. So, while this is the ideal solo team for the most part, there is a lot of flexibility, and to be honest, you still can clear content if you are missing some of those cards. One thing I want to mention is that in co-op, your setup does differ, most notably because you don't have to have double SBR coverage, as well as you want to shift your shift your inherits around, because putting inherits on your Dark Athena that are used most commonly would be beneficial because they charge up twice as fast. So for instance, your board changers like Reunite would probably want to be put on your Dark Athena. So, viable alternatives. So, I listed the ideal SBR cards above, so obviously follow that for the alternatives. But for your subs, yes, Haku is so strong because she has 1,000 weighted stats, a relevant board changer, dual TP8, 7 combo awakenings. So, you want to try and find subs that can at least mimic this as best as possible. And the top 3 I would say would be Reincarnate Persephone, Sima Yi, and Noctis, because they are at least close to covering all those aspects that Haku has. So they are relevant and powerful, and you can mix and match as needed. If you want to go down a little bit, we do have Reincarnate Yomi, Anubis, as Shamali, because they all bring some value to the team, as well as possible utility that you may not have otherwise. Farmable options include Greta for the relevant double TPA, Orb Changer, and Zerg Infinity, especially in co-op mode, because Zerg Infinity will then gain a bazillion amount of stats through that co-op boost. And in all honesty, even cards like Pandora and Yomi Dragon still can work as viable subs. Like, they do work. Like, as long as you have some of the ideal team and some of those stronger subs, Dark Athena will be able to clear content for you. And provided you have most of the cards with TPA, 1 or 2 without does at least won't hinder your damage sufficiently to make life so challenging, at least at the beginning of Arena 3. So, skill inheritance. So, skill inheritance is a very important aspect of Puzzle & Dragons because it allows you to customize cards to your liking, and that way you can gain the required utility that you need to tackle dungeons. Obviously, on a dungeon-by-dungeon basis, your inheritance setup will change and vary. So this is basically the list that I've come up with. I may or may not be missing a card or there, so let me know if I am missing something, and I'll add it in. So obviously the video cannot reflect it, but the article will be updated with appropriate skill inheritance. But for the most part, these are the general inherits that people will be using. So obviously if you have a bunch of these, it will make your life a lot easier moving forward. So, who can actually acquire 750,000 monster points? Because obviously everyone wants to have access to all the toys, but unfortunately not everyone can have all the toys. It will be somewhat restricted to players who have either played the game for a long time, they're dedicated in farming, or they simply just spend a lot of money on the game and have excessive monster points. And all three of those are, well, sorry, two of those are attainable by everyone, because if you played for a long time or you're dedicated, you can definitely farm up Dark Athena. Because, for instance, older players will probably have saved up enough monster points naturally over time, because for myself, I actually bought Yomi Dragon when she was first released, what, maybe 15 months ago? Maybe more, I don't know. And since then, I've probably farmed up over 1 million monster points with selling very few cards from the rare machine. I sold very few things. It mostly came from either, say, farming rogue descents, the co-op bonus helps, as well as even just placing well in ranking tournaments. It's 10,000 per ranking tournament. We've had 10 plus. I've always got at least the 10,000 pre-draw, so I've got over 100,000 from ranking dungeons. So playing for a long time will have probably yielded you monster points in the long haul. So if you've been dedicated and saving for a long period of time, you probably have the means to buy Dark Athena. In addition, people who are dedicated to farming monster points will have acquired Dark Athena. Every day we gain 480 natural stamina, and with all the new and fancy ways to rank up, we have all these ways to refresh our stamina bar. So if you are able to farm Rogue Descends, you gain 500 monster points per clear, plus all those collateral benefits that are happy and tasty. So you can chain rank ups as well as basically farming towards monster points. Now, let's say you just make 10 clears per day, because not everyone can play all the time. But 10 clears will yield you 5,000 monster points plus all those other benefits. And that means it'll take maybe 150 days or 5 months to farm up Dark Athena. Plus you'll be doing all these other stuff and acquiring monster points from, say, gifts, as well as ranking dungeon rewards, so on and so forth. So there are so many different ways to acquire monster points if you're dedicated, and I feel like a lot of players who've been planning ahead of time will be sitting ready to purchase Dark Athena come Monday. And then finally, people who have too much monster points. Basically, players who have spent money on the game will have excessive amounts of cards to sell as duplicates. They will naturally have monster points available. Again, that's not necessarily a situation everyone can use, so take that point with a grain of salt. So, in conclusion, to buy or not to buy, this really comes down to your own personal Puzzle and Dragon goals and your resources available. Dark Athena can clear all the content available in the game, so that does definitely open up the doors to many players. And if you do have a reasonable team as well as the means to acquire her, I would say you should pull the trigger and purchase her. She's going to dramatically enhance your progression levels overall, and it might actually make pad more exciting for you in case you're in a lull. So there is a lot of merits and justification for the higher price tag, just because she's ready to use and quite accessible for the most part. For myself, I do plan to purchase Dark Athena on both my accounts, because I have been saving up monster points because I knew she would come to North America. So let me know what you think about Dark Athena in the comments below. What does your team setup look like, and how do you plan to get around the optimal team if you're missing certain cards here or there? Hopefully you all have a fantastic day. I look forward to all those Dark Athenas on Monday, and happy puzzling!